The year of the rabbit is approaching, but many of us are ringing in this new year with mixed feelings. Since the country prioritized its COVID-19 policy last December, many had to wrestle with the virus after 3 years of just hearing about it. Not everyone has been lucky. China estimates from December the 8th, 2022 to January the 12th this year, nearly 60,000 people, including those with underlying conditions, have died in mainland hospitals after they contracted COVID. The fight for life is still ongoing in some parts. But for the great majority of people, this is a time for family reunion. For tens of millions of people, this is the first time in almost 3 years that they can travel freely to their hometowns and reunite with their loved ones. Many a tear will be shed from the overwhelming sense of joy intensified by newfound normalcy. On some Western media, you hear that China has failed and that up to 1 million lives could be lost. Now, some weeks after the COVID shift, what are the facts telling us? Despite the wave of infections that swept through China, we did not see a massive death toll. I personally visited a respiratory ward in Beijing in early January, and the head doctor told me by then they had admitted 97 inpatients because of COVID, and among them, 7 had died. Sad as it is, that's not a huge number. Of course, there was a different picture in ICUs, but what I saw and heard was broadly in line with the numbers that the authorities released. Taking the whole 3 years into consideration, China secured one of the lowest death tolls in the world. One would ask, how did China manage that? Remember the dynamic zero COVID policy? It feels like a long time ago already, but yes, until the beginning of last December, China and the Chinese people held out there against all odds and at all costs. The authorities did everything possible to put people's lives first, and the people did what they could to collaborate. With unbelievably strenuous efforts, we warded off 4 more deadly variants. Meanwhile, we developed our own vaccines and medicines, of course, including traditional Chinese medicine. We even exported vaccines to help others. By early December, 90% of Chinese people had received at least 2 doses of vaccines. As a result, before the virus swept through, the population had already some levels of immunity from vaccination. This is in stark contrast to some Western countries, which opted for herd immunity by infection plus vaccination when the virus was much more lethal, hence taking a much heavier toll on human lives. On some Western media, you would hear that the Chinese have not been vaccinated or that their vaccines don't work. They only show you the worst and the most shocking scenes, however twisted they may be. But let me tell you, we've got heroes too. Heroes who are making a huge difference at times of difficulty like this. Doctors who are seeing patients despite being sick, nurses whose own family members may be in ICUs, retired doctors called back to help out, volunteers organizing online platforms to share much-needed medicines, the village doctors helping farmers in remote areas, the couriers who kept our cities running when we were sick at home, the community workers who served as the critical link between government policy and the local residents, and so on and so forth. All of these on top of government measures to increase capacity nationwide to care for the elderly and vulnerable. On Western media, you don't hear these stories nearly as much, but we've got heroes too. And together, we did something unprecedented in human history to fend off a plague for a population of 1.4 billion for 3 years. This Spring Festival will be a time to remember those who perished, but more importantly, to celebrate life. After 3 years of collective efforts, we can open up again. Our economy is bouncing back, and life is returning to normal. After 3 years of collective efforts, we have emerged from the first wave of infection from Omicron in relatively good shape. There might be future waves, but we are not afraid anymore because we have learned something new about the virus and about ourselves. We had difficulties, but in times of a pandemic, nobody can be 100% prepared. Looking back at the past 3 years, we did our utmost, and the fight is still going on.